Yes, that's right. If you look at the wall, it is indeed Biden time. Time that comes along a little bit less frequently these days, but we didn't want to leave all of you hanging on election night, just like the voters and the vote counters did. Welcome to Biden time. I am Christian Bladt. She is Tamra Brown, and
Hello
he
there.
is Scott Moore. S-Man 80 to all of you. Welcome. And Scott, I saw the photos of fun memory. The night itself wasn't as fun, but Facebook memories yesterday. 6 years ago, we did
Right.
our live Trump versus Hillary special
Woo.
that stretched into a 2-night finale, and it had your map in it that
Yeah.
you colored so well. That was before Tamara was with us, but Drexel and Chelsea and some other
Yep.
friends were there with us, and I feel like the last 8 years has only felt like about 80 years, but I mean, that's just me. So,
Oh yeah.
and
I
I
think
looked
we
at,
can all agree
I
on
looked at me and I'm like, oh, I look old there too, but not this old. So
that.
it's been a long ride. And, I wanted to get both of your thoughts about last night. And Tamara's clicked off her camera, so I think she might be adjusting something. So I'll
Yes,
ask
I
you.
will be back in
That's
just a second.
quite all right. You come back when the getting is good. Scott, I think that a lot of the writing on the wall was that not tomorrow, but yesterday was going to be the big red wave, and you had people who were like, well, maybe not, but for the most part, a lot of the polling basically gave that impression, and I don't know what that says about polling for these same 8 years that we're talking about.
Yeah.
But were you surprised with how? And look, lots of votes still being counted. Things can swing either way. But the impression that I think a lot of people got, myself included, was that we were going to know pretty early that it was not going to be a good night for Democrats, and it still might not be a great night for them, but it wasn't the disaster that we were
The
prepped for. What
slaughter.
do you think? Yeah, exactly. What do you think, Scott?
I honestly think that it is a great night for Democrats. No matter what happens, it was a great night last night for Democrats because in a typical year, first midterm of a presidential term, regardless of party, tends to be bad for that party in power. You go all the way back in the history, and really only 2002 is the only time where you could see that difference, and that was after 9/11, where they picked up some seats. The Republicans picked up seats, and also there was a second midterm for Clinton where Democrats picked up seats as well in '98. But the first one is usually not a great one. So considering how bad it could have been for Democrats, the fact that even if the Democrats were to lose the House, which was expected, it may only be by a couple of seats, not a commanding majority for Republicans at all. And the Senate looks pretty safe for Democrats. We'll have to see how Nevada plays out, and it looks like the Georgia Senate is going back to a runoff again on December 6th. So if it really comes down to just Georgia again, that's going to be insane.
Yeah, and Raphael Warnock has only run for that seat like 6 times, so why not do it one more? It's he's like, I got that down at this point. Yeah.
And I was going to say, and I was going to say that Democratic governors won,
Yeah.
abortion won for the freedom to abortion, even in the reddest of states that you can find, like Kentucky.
Kentucky was the one.
Oh, really? I didn't hear that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, California voting, to codify abortion rights is hardly a shock. But Kentucky, I was like, okay, so this is not the only deep blue issue that some Republicans seem to think it is. When Kentucky is voting, like, yeah, we're not going to get as involved. So yeah, no, I agree. We were told to prepare for the red wave. And I think it was really, ultimately, it was just a little bit of pink spotting throughout the map. It was very manageable. It could be tolerated. And, I think that, look, you have okay, let's look at the most obvious example. Boy, was it a good night for Ron DeSantis. I mean, that there was Charlie Crist was like, wait, what did I just spend the last year doing?
I do have opinions on that one as well.
Go ahead.
Being from Florida too, but partly, yes, I do think you can't discount Ron DeSantis' great night when you look at, in fact, right now, he has a wider gap with his win than Gavin Newsom does out here in California. But, you could take that in a lot of different ways. A lot of people are like, it's a foregone conclusion that Gavin Newsom's going to win a re-election here. So a lot of voters probably didn't even really care. But in Florida, they felt driven. But again, it has to come down to candidates. Charlie Crist was a former Republican governor. Right. And I think, we've talked about this time and time again, and even Mitch McConnell will agree with me on this one. It comes to candidate quality. And if Nikki Fried had been the Democratic nominee, the only statewide elected official in Florida, and she was more progressive, it might have been a lot closer. I think when you look at some of the numbers and you really dig down, you see the Democratic numbers really didn't come up or didn't really change that much. And I think that's partly because Democrats were not motivated to vote for Charlie Crist because he was basically Republican light. He was a former Republican governor. He was not a great campaigner. He had not the same fundraising prowess as Ron DeSantis. Yes, I mean, Ron DeSantis won, and it kind of goes back to here in California in 2010 when we had the big red wave when 63 seats went in the House to Republicans, and it ended at California because California elected all statewide Democratic officials, and Jerry Brown won the governorship. So it's kind of like that, where the blue, the red wave really was just confined to Florida. So yeah, it was a great showing for Ron DeSantis. Absolutely, that's one of the biggest, landslide victories for a Republican in modern history for the state of Florida. There's no doubt about that, considering he barely won, I think, by like 30,000 votes in 2018. So it is definitely a big win for him. But I think when you start to dig down a little deeper, you start to see candidate quality with Charlie Crist. You start to see Democratic turnout was not robust like it was for Republicans. And then you start to see, is his type of style, would that really work in a national environment? And I'm not so sure about that. So people may be thinking, get rid of Trump. Let's have DeSantis be our person. And yes, to some degree, I get where they're coming from, but he's very untested when it comes to the national stage. And he also had a lot of luck kind of fall his way to give him those bigger numbers. He would have won anyways. He was an incumbent. He had the power of incumbency.
Right.
But if you start to dig a little deeper, you can kind of take a little bit more out of that than he was so incredible and such a great candidate that he won this landslide victory. I think a lot of it was Democrats were just not empowered by Charlie Crist at the top of the ticket to go out and vote for a former Republican governor that was now running as a Democrat. So that really wasn't something that appealed to them.
Right. No, I think that makes sense. Tamra, as you sort of assess this morning the way that things went, what are your big picture thoughts? We'll get into some specific stuff as we go along, but just big picture, what were your expectations heading into last night, and how are you feeling this morning?
I'm feeling really great. I had a fun day yesterday. Now, I don't know if I've mentioned on the show, but I've been volunteering on a campaign for state assembly for the past year. And so one of the candidates that's running for California State Assembly, I've been doing the, canvassing, door knocking stuff. And so yesterday morning at 6:30 a.m., in the pouring rain, I went to one of the polling stations. We set up a pop tent to do our last ditch, vote Abramson. And, you have to be 100 feet away from the entrance, which we were. And I could not believe at 6:30, 7 o'clock in the morning in the pouring rain, I was expecting to not see. I was like, our whole shift, we're not going to see anybody. There's not going to be anybody showing up. People were coming. They were lining up at 7 in the morning in the rain, young people. And I was just so surprised by that. And to me, that was the what do they call it? The bellwether, the word that kept being thrown around on CNN. Like, I was like, wow, people are coming. More people are actually coming out than I was expecting. So that started the day off right. And that particular race, by the way, is not, we're probably not going to know the results for a few days now. But then after that, it was just kind of a fun day of working and tuning into CNN with all of their baloney time wasters, because we weren't getting any information until polls closed later on in the day. But once they did close and those results started coming in, it was very surprising. And then for the candidate that I was volunteering with the campaign, we had like the party last night. As of last night, Karen Bass was in the lead over Caruso. I just checked just before we started recording, and now Caruso is in the lead, which is terrifying. But aside from that, yesterday was a very pleasant surprise.
Yeah, and as we were talking, even though we all live in Los Angeles, I am a resident of the People's Utopia of Burbank, so I don't get to vote on Los Angeles politics. So all I know is that Rick Caruso has had an ad that ran very often. That was Karen Bass speaking very favorably about Scientology at one of their events, and I was like, "Oh, that could work on me," because it's that you don't want to be a one issue voter, but I'm like, "Oh, that's a bad judgment. I'd have to have read more," but I didn't have to read more about her because I wasn't able to vote for her, and I know if I had read more on Rick Caruso, I've heard enough. But I was like, "Oh, that might be effective in some way." When it's like, I saw that documentary, so it's like, oh boy, that's pro Scientology was not something I expected to be on the ballot, but I guess I should because it's Los Angeles. But the surprising thing in that race was celebrities publicly, like Katy Perry showed her ballot, and she was voting for Rick Caruso, and Snoop Dogg wanted people to know.
It was very
yeah.
telling because people like Gwyneth Paltrow, the celebrities that are voting for Caruso are celebrities that are looking for their own financial interests is what they care about, because that's what Caruso is, the candidate that is going to, keep people with real estate interests and development interests, keep money in their pockets. And so, yeah, I mean, it makes sense. But like, I've been astonished this whole race. And actually, this is my first time having any type of involvement with a campaign. And I'm astonished at how advertising actually works on people. I mean, I didn't realize that was a thing, but that is, I mean, because the reason that I find that so absurd is because anybody can put anything on a flyer. You can say, Donald Trump could send out a flyer that says that, Ron
DeSantis drowns puppies. I've seen it with my own eyes. Believe me, it's terrible.
Yeah,
He's a terrible guy.
People will. And you can put anything on a flyer, and apparently people will believe it. So many people through this whole thing have been like, Rick Caruso, he really is invested in homelessness. He's going to clean up homelessness. And it's like, this is a man who's a billionaire who has never spent a dime or a minute of interest using his wealth or influence to address homelessness in any way at all. But yet suddenly he starts this campaign and he's I'm going to tackle the homelessness problem. And it's just like,
yeah,
how? You know nothing about it. You've never cared. You've never done a single thing, but yet we're supposed to believe that you're suddenly invested in it.
One of the most telling things that I saw, it was just a tweet. It was someone who was working, or I guess I don't know. It might be anecdotal, might be real, might not be real, but I could see it happening in a New York polling place, overhearing an elderly woman saying that she couldn't find Dr. Oz on her ballot, because she wanted to vote for him. And I'm like, you know what? That might not be real, but I 100% believe that.
Yep.
It's just, and that is actually the race that I wanted to talk about. And, earlier in the day, look, Fetterman had a stroke earlier this year, and, didn't have the strongest showing in the debate that they did, as a result. And I think that it was just telling what a bad idea it was to run Dr. Oz, who does not live in that state and does not relate to people in the state of Pennsylvania, and apparently Donald Trump is furious this morning that Melania talked him into it. I love that it's her fault. Did you see that headline, Scott? Yeah.
Yes, I did.
I love that it's Melania's fault. It was like, I didn't want to vote. I didn't want to endorse Dr. Oz, but it was I don't know. I mean, we'll talk about Herschel Walker in a minute, because that's another one that I'm just like, what an astonishingly bad candidate. But that could, he could still actually end up being a senator, which is crazy. But the Dr. Oz thing, I mean, if he had run in New Jersey where he really lives, okay. But they ran him in Pennsylvania. Like, what do you make of that whole thing, Scott? The fact that, slightly less than half of the state still voted for him. But what do you chalk it up to?
I mean, again, and I hate saying I agree with Mitch McConnell, but it comes down to candidate quality, and that's what happened with Republicans in 2012. And look, I get it. I wasn't a big fan, really, to be honest with you, when Hillary Clinton moved to New York and decided I'm going to run for the Senate in 2000.
Right.
It was kind of like very opportunistic. So I could say it on both sides. I mean, it is an opportunistic thing. He was a terrible candidate.
Well, especially because like Hillary should have run from Illinois because it's
Right.
where she's from.
Because it's where she's from, and it's a Democratic state still.
Yeah.
But beyond that, I mean, he was just a poor quality candidate. And we see in this election that the Democrats really consolidated really well in the upper Midwest and areas that we thought, minus Ohio, which we can see Ohio and Iowa and Florida aren't really the battlegrounds anymore. It's now shifted to Nevada, Arizona, and Georgia. But we can see that the Democrats really did well again in most of the upper Midwest. Tony Evers won re-election for governor in Wisconsin. Gretchen Whitmer and Democratic candidates won handily in Michigan. They're going to have a trifecta of power. Pennsylvania, same thing. The governor cruised to victory, which also helped pull in, I think, Democrat voters because Shapiro won by such a big number that he helped also pull Fetterman over across the finish line with some of those skeptics. But yeah, it really went to show that Pennsylvania kind of reverted back a bit more to its Democratic roots, that it's kind of ebbed and flowed in 2016 and 2020 was super close. But yeah, you just had a terrible candidate. And like we talked about earlier, when you put up progressive candidates with Democrats, they tend to do better. And that goes back again to Florida. And it goes back to some of the other races where Democrats get a little skittish to put out their progressive candidates and want to vote for the more moderate or in the middle. But they fail to realize it tends to depress turnout among those Democratic voters, and you're not going to get crossover voters that much. I mean, I know we see it work with someone like Joe Biden, but Biden's a little bit unique in the situation of the history. What was it, 50 years ago, I think yesterday is when he won his first election into the U.S. Senate. So, I mean, Joe Biden's is more of an anomaly than what is sort of the future of the Democratic Party. But I think, again, it really comes down to candidate quality, and you could see that up and down. And that's the same thing for Republicans. If they had some better candidates, we could be looking at a different night for the Senate control, and even the House having a much bigger victory if they had better candidates.
Tamara,
are you saying Fetterman is progressive? I thought he was pretty moderate.
No, he's definitely more progressive than Lamb, who was Connor Lamb, who was his primary opponent. Absolutely, he's much more progressive.
Tamara, do you think that Dr. Oz was the best TV phony to run for the Senate, or should they have possibly had a fake judge or another fake? They're more qualified candidate.
Dip into the well of the Oprah universe.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, yeah. If you just keep it to the Oprah verse, that's I think Gayle King would have done very well.
Gayle King, sure, she would have been a great candidate. She would have. Even Dr. Phil would have been better than Dr. Oz, but yeah, I mean, I don't know why he decided to run. I don't know why for the state of Pennsylvania, but the fact that this person who has severely damaged people by talking people into denying themselves cancer treatment because they think that they just need to eat, that's actually an evil thing to do. So yeah. the fact that he got as far as he did, it's just astonishing.
Yeah, and Scott, you were making the point sort of the strength of the governor. What we're seeing in the results out of Georgia is that Brian Kemp overwhelmingly was reelected over Stacey Abrams, but that did not really help prop up Herschel Walker. So there were a lot more split ticket in Georgia. And I don't know if that's surprising to you that, I mean, I think a lot of people I know, whichever, party they're registered as, they do tend to just, vote straight blue, straight red, whatever, because honestly, it's easier. It's like, I'm more likely to agree with this person. talking about these quality of candidates, does that really speak to the lack of quality around Herschel Walker in Georgia?
Well, it's across the board. It's an interesting phenomenon because, in the relatively recent history, splitting tickets was a very common practice. A lot of times you would vote for a president, and in that same year, you would vote for the opposition Senate candidate. And that was, till really in the past 15 years or so, that split ticket has kind of gone away. And in 2020, we only had it really in Maine, where you saw Joe Biden win the presidency in Maine, but Susan Collins, Republican, maintained her Senate. This year was very fascinating because we saw it in a couple places. And again, it does go down to quality of candidates. You see it in Georgia. You saw it in New Hampshire, where Krista Sununu won re-election as Republican governor by a large amount. And then Maggie Hassan ended up winning the Senate by like 9 points. So Democrat and Republican there. You saw it in Wisconsin, where Tony Evers won as Democrat for re-election as governor, but it looks like Ron Johnson has won to maintain his Senate seat as a Republican. So you saw it in several states this year, which was really quite interesting to see. But I do think Brian Kemp did help Herschel Walker a bit. And I was reading a lot leading up to the election of some folks that were much more comfortable voting for Brian Kemp, that were even some Biden voters in 2020, but didn't want to vote for Herschel Walker, but ended up pulling for him at the end because they were kind of ancestral Republicans. And I do think that Brian Kemp's lead really helped pull him over, whereas in other states, it was kind of the reverse effect. Tony Evers wasn't able to quite pull Mandela Barnes over the finish line in Wisconsin, which in some degree was surprising because I know Ron Johnson has now ostensibly won his third term, but Mandela Barnes was also a statewide candidate, being the current lieutenant governor, that I thought there might have been more of a pull for him considering Tony Evers was the governor, but didn't quite work out that way. And I think New Hampshire is the most fascinating, but kind of like Maine, they're similar in their politics and everything, and more kind of middle independent. And you saw a very big split between Krista Sununu winning the Republican, election as governor, but also, and again, he was not a Trump supporter and was very much, big on that. And I think you got a lot of crossover for both him and for Maggie Hassan across party lines. And you have a very big independent voter block in New Hampshire too, where they kind of go back and forth. But I think the split ticket thing is interesting, and it'll be fascinating to see if this is a trend that kind of comes back a bit more, or if this was an anomaly going back to candidate quality in some of those particular races, for sure.
Tamra, talking about Stacey Abrams and sort of lumping Beto O'Rourke in along with her, those seem to be sort of those kind of candidates that are very well regarded on a national level, but again, don't seem to connect with the people actually voting for them. Obviously, in tremendous number of people voted for both of them. And I'm not saying that, but they're managing not to win. And what do you think the difference is there, Tamara? Do you think it's just that simple that, Texas and Georgia are certainly places with, a number of Democratic voters. You've got your blue pockets, but in general, the majority of the state isn't going to, feel like Beto O'Rourke has their interests, but what do you think about sort of the actual candidate quality of, both those, in particular, Stacey Abrams and Beto O'Rourke, Tamara?
It's hard to say. I know for Beto O'Rourke, he's one of those people that he gets, even by the left, he gets made fun of a lot. They make fun of him for when he's so eager to speak Spanish. And I mean, Christian, you make fun of him with riding the skateboard across the stage and things like that. So
yeah, see that, and that goes a long way. And look, he wasn't the last time he wasn't able to beat, a guy who looks like Count Dracula, a guy who was booed at the Houston Astros World Series parade. Ted Cruz is incredibly unlikable, but he still didn't beat him. And I think that being able to beat Greg Abbott was a much taller order. I think that this is a moment in Texas where Greg Abbott is considered, very popular because of, and Brian Kemp too. They're both guys who were like, no, we're going to kind of open our states ahead of what some of the federal regulations are COVID wise, and I think that people remember those. But yeah, I know Beto, I think I actually forgot about the skateboard. I'm so glad you reminded me.
But all I'm saying with that is just that it's like when races are, when we already know ahead of time that a race is going to be that close, even if it's against somebody who's as disliked as Ted Cruz, those type of races, the Democratic candidate has to be flawless, has to be perfect, which Beto O'Rourke just, it's those annoying criticisms that don't really matter as far as, policy and plan. Well, but then too, I mean, a lot of people do feel that he doesn't have a lot of they do have criticism for certain plans or lack thereof. But then again, for as far as Stacey Abrams, she is a perfect candidate. She doesn't, there's no making fun of her for her voice or for saying something stupid in an interview or something like that.
You mean nobody ever told her to ride a skateboard on stage? I don't think she has the right people around her.
At this point,
just to interject, I would say that the thing that I think might hurt Stacey Abrams in Georgia, maybe not nationally, but I mean, there's comments she had about the fetal heartbeat not being real, that it's a myth. And I saw those quotes from her. And I think that if you feel that way and you're running a state in Georgia, you might not say that in an interview. I think that, obviously she didn't necessarily run on abortion rights exclusively, but I think that that probably made her seem more extreme. But I do agree with you. Quality of candidate, she's probably better than Beto. But what do you think about both of those, Scott? Those two in particular, but just, I mean, it's really the concept of candidates with national appeal, candidates who get celebrities to endorse them and help them raise money. Go ahead.
I think, it's part of the sizzle, as Beto had the sizzle of national interest, but when we look at Texas, it's still a very Republican state at the state level, and it will be. So it's already hard to be able to pull off a win there and be able to, in a state that large. Georgia's a little bit different. Like I said earlier, well, again, you have two incumbent governors too, which already incumbency is a difficult thing to run against, even more so in a year that still was trending Republican, regardless of how big the wave or not. So you already are in an uphill battle in states that still lean Republican, even in a battleground state like Georgia. But the difference is, I think, with Brian Kemp is there were a lot, like we talked about, there were a lot of voters that voted for Biden in Georgia in 2020 that put him over the edge there to win the state, that felt comfortable enough to vote for Brian Kemp. Because if you recall, Brian Kemp was not the Trumpian person. And in fact, he had, David Perdue, the former senator in Georgia, run against him in the primary, who was the Trump person, to try to weaken him and topple him. And so a lot of people that were not quite comfortable being full-fledged Democrats, but would cross over to vote for Biden, felt more comfortable to return home and vote for Brian Kemp because he was not so Trumpian and was not endorsed or supported by Trump and was okay with not having Trump support, and went ahead and certified the election for Biden in 2020. So you had a lot of those voters, which were very close when you see, how narrow that victory was for Biden in 2020, that felt comfortable to return home to vote for Brian Kemp as a moderate Republican. So that race is, again, very different from the Greg Abbott, Beto O'Rourke. And also Stacey Abrams is a lot more of a kingmaker or queenmaker, maybe, as the fact that she was able to build an infrastructure almost against her own, best interest for other candidates. But it seems like she's had a hard enough time as herself. Like, she's great behind the scenes and really was really big on being able to flip Georgia in 2020 was from her infrastructure that she has built. But it has been able to not quite get that for her own self, but is able to do it for other candidates like we saw with Joe Biden and with John Ossoff and Raphael Warnock in 2020, which, again, outside influences with Trump and everything played a big role in that too. But she has been able to really build a big infrastructure, whereas Beto O'Rourke has not been able to do that in the same kind of capacity in Texas, for not just him, but for other candidates. And we've seen that. And we've seen some big changes there. A whole other thing to discuss is the Latino vote and how that's shifted too, and the border towns in South Texas versus and how it's changed in Florida, but yet how the younger votes in the Latino vote has trended Democratic in other areas like in the Southwest. So there's a lot of things at play there, but I think they're very different candidates. They just have a lot of sizzle in the national stage, but in the actual states, it doesn't quite translate just yet.
Scott, you referenced Brian Kemp certifying the election for President Biden, and Tamra, I wanted to shift the focus on. It was not a great night for election deniers. And I think a couple of them squeaked through. And there's a few cases where we have the impression that, of course, some Democrats might have helped out along the way. But I wanted to share this before and after image that I saw on this Twitter account that I don't follow, but somebody liked it. This is the before and after Lauren Boebert election party. So you see there on the left, this is, early in the night. And then at the end of the night, everyone literally staring down at the ground. You see that, and legitimately it's probably a moment of prayer. But that was one of those races where I think that, the people on the left were certainly able to go like, all right, that seems like a good indication. What do you think? I guess there's a chance that Kari Lake could still win in Arizona, but it's looking like that's not the case. But do you think that this is a positive indication, Tamra, that maybe, just maybe, election denying hasn't become the new American pastime?
Ooh, I don't know if I can be that optimistic. There are some very troubling people who have gotten into that were elected last night, and even though some of the ones that were making headlines were not, I don't know. And also too, where is this going to go? Are we going to have some like state house insurrections now in races? If Kari Lake loses, is there going to be a Arizona State House insurrection now, claiming that this was rigged and fraud and all of that kind of stuff? I mean,
it's Arizona. Literally anything's possible.
So it's definitely good news, and it's definitely better than I was expecting. But we've just gotten into times where 10 years ago nobody ever thought that things that are actually believed 10 years ago, no one would ever think that electing somebody who believes QAnon theories could ever actually make it into office. Even a conservative probably wouldn't have believed that. Maybe not 10 years ago, prior to the Tea Party. That was probably something that would never have been believed. But we're just in a time where it's like, oh, this candidate believes that trees come to life and eat people. Okay.
I've seen that with my eyes. A historical document from 1939. I didn't see the trees eat people, but I saw them throwing apples at a little girl from Kansas. So if you're telling me the trees don't come to life, we're going to just have to agree to disagree, Tamra. I'm sorry. This idea of quality of candidate, Scott, that is a big part of it. I think the election deniers, I think that in New York State for governor, Kathy Hochul would have been very vulnerable, except for the fact that Lee Zeldin was a Trump guy, and also, seemed to feel that the 2020 election was stolen. And, there was the New York Post was all in on Lee Zeldin the last few days, and I meant to grab it, but I'm an idiot. Their full page this morning was DeSantis winning, and then really low, and Hochul holds on in New York. The state that this paper is for. Yeah, this race that you people actually voted in. We're going to put a little tiny. I'll find it in a moment, but and I think that. I agree with Tamra that maybe I'm trying to put a little bit of an extra cherry on top of it, but it's an indication that it's like, okay, that's not necessarily a winning formula across the country, but it asks the question, how valuable is the Donald Trump endorsement this morning, Scott?
I think, and I've been seeing a lot of Republicans actually, talking about this the day after, and the point is that it's taken so long for them to realize that he is such an albatross, and we have talked about this for years on this podcast about what a albatross he really is. Because when you really go back to it, he lost the popular vote in 2016 and won by a fluke, and every other election that he's been involved with has lost. 2018, 2020, and now with him being in the background still, and his candidates, a lot of his candidates, except for JD Vance, again in a very Republican state of Ohio, all lost or underperformed.
But again, Dr. Oz was Melania's fault. Let's remember that.
Well, and that's part of the problem, is that he can never take any blame for anything. And I think a lot of Republicans are waking up this morning and thinking, is he really the person that we want to keep in our background? Because really, we've talked about this, that base that he goes after is continuously shrinking. It is not getting bigger, and it gets smaller and smaller. You have less people to pull from. And that's why I think a lot of Republicans are waking up this morning and seeing Ron DeSantis's resounding victory in Florida and thinking, oh, now that's our guy. And so it's going to be fascinating to see how that plays out in the coming weeks. Does Trump still announce next week? Does that, become a big thing? It's going to be really interesting to see what happens now on that end, if Republicans will come together and finally excise him from politics. The other thing I think of is he will not go quietly tonight. He would probably run for a third party and say, screw the Republicans. And that would give a very, a good chance for a Democrat that could be.
Oh yeah. I mean, if Trump runs as a third party, that's a great day for whoever the Democratic nominee would be. Not Hillary, from what I'm told, but whoever would run. But I kind of look at it this way, Tamra. I think that the Trump support is just as diehard amongst there's the true believers, but I sort of look at it more of like, the Grateful Dead or the band Fish. There's all those people in that arena that love what's on the stage. But if you ask any of the three of us right now, do you know the name of any Fish songs? I don't. I had a roommate who loved that band. I still don't know the names of any of those songs. And I think that, there are some people that just love everything about him, but there's a little bit less of them than there were. But, they can fill a rally in rural Pennsylvania because he's going to be there. But that doesn't mean that they're going to vote for, I almost called him Mr. Oz. I'm sorry, Dr. Oz. What do you think, Tamra? Is Trumpism becoming a little bit more of a hobby at this point? I mean, not that you want to dismiss it outright, but, Scott cited basically his entire political history in terms of the underwhelming support he's able to generate.
I don't know if it's not a hobby, because the people who do support him, it is a lifestyle. It is who they are. It is ingrained in their personality. They want the bumper stickers. They want the hats. They do
love those hats. You're right.
They don't understand why Democrats aren't wearing Biden hats and don't, just pledge their allegiance to Biden the way that they do to Trump, because they don't, they think like, oh, if you support this leader, then that leader is your God and you do not question them. And so I'd say it's a lifestyle instead of a hobby, but it's definitely a smaller and smaller group of people, but still significant. I said even before any of the results yesterday, as I was having discussions with people who are terrified that Trump's going to win in 2024, and I just said there's really no way. He lost the popular vote in 2016. He lost in 2020, and his popularity is only decreasing. So I'm confident when I'm really never confident anymore about anything. I'm confident that he could not win in 2024. Though his support is shrinking, it is still they're smaller but still mighty. There's still way too many people who align themselves with those type of ideals. So it is still terrifying. And even if he doesn't win, they are still capable of a lot of damage.
to your point, Tamara, that it's more of a lifestyle than a hobby. It's sort of like nudists, they live that way, but no one in their family really ever wants to talk to them, and they definitely don't invite them over for Thanksgiving. I mean, unless I guess you have a lot of towels to put down on chairs and things. It's a lifestyle that if you're in it, you understand, but everybody else is like, yeah, or I don't know, maybe it's like a fad from like a few years ago. People are like, oh yeah, I was into Trump for a little while. It's like Kanye. People were into Kanye a while ago. I don't know what happened. People don't even talk about him anymore. But no, obviously, I think that look, I think there are districts where that endorsement will go a very long way and help. But I think on a national level, you have people. I mean, do you think that Dr. Oz and Lee Zeldin are glad that they hitched their wagon to Trump? This morning there's definitely somebody in both of those camps going like, yeah, we probably could have gone another way. But so obviously, and earlier there's a couple comments in the chat. One, Dominicus Saxon says, I never sit on this show because I usually don't talk politics with friends, but wanted to give a shout out to Evil Christian. That's a reference to, of course, how I am the Mirror Universe Christian with the facial hair. It'll be gone soon. It really is just a Halloween costume I couldn't let go of out of mostly laziness. Coast 8386 has talked about how long it's been. He mentions Georgia and both Florida. It's been a very long time since either of them had Democratic governors. And
Texas too. Same thing.
Texas. Yeah. It was Ann Richards the last one. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, and I don't know whatever happened to the guy who beat Ann Richards. I hope that he had a successful career. I think he's painting now, actually, is what I've heard of that guy who beat Ann Richards.
A retired painter, yes.
Yeah, he's a retired painter. Comes from a big family, but
sure.
Yeah, somewhere in there. And bless you, Roz JD, but you put so many comments, I can't find the ones I actually want. Okay, so you reference this idea, sort of, as we begin our sort of wind down here for our examination. I agree with Scott. This idea of like, you can be happier about it. Yes, if it could very well happen that come January, the Republicans have the House. That's very likely. Having the Senate is entirely possible. So both of those things could be true, but I mean, it's not the mandate that they were looking for. It's not. And I've seen a lot of Republicans posting today that it's like, it's not that our values aren't in touch with the American people. These are, just Republicans. These aren't Q folk.
Mm-hmm.
But the candidates have been bad. They haven't been focusing on the right things. And, in some of these cases, I heard someone saying on CNN last night that Democrats ran local elections and a lot of Republicans were running national elections. So they were running on national issues. They were running on anti-Biden stuff, which you find a lot of people who don't like Joe Biden. I saw a lot of tweets yesterday like, hey, make sure you stop off and fill your gas tank on your way to the polls. That'll, show, that'll help you determine what kind of mood you're in. But at the same time, it's like, okay, yeah, I care about those things, but what's going on locally? And when you have a candidate like Dr. Oz, who I think before he started campaigning there, he'd probably never even been to Pennsylvania, so I think it makes it that harder. Do you think that that's a big part of what happened yesterday? Why Democrats were able to have any degree of success is because they were focused on what voters in their districts wanted to hear.
Well, there's a lot of things that you could take from that. You could parse out the fact, has the wave election also gone away? We've talked about this too. The landslide victories for presidents has gone away in the last, 25 years or so. And now we're starting to see a narrowing of wave elections to where we're not getting those big oscillations anymore. And is this the new trend too? Like, is it more of a coin flip election now every time, where it's 50+1 on either side, and we see such a closely divided nation, and we just see a little bit on one direction or another can shift the presidency as well as the House and the Senate, and have this very narrow numbers, because even going back to 2020, usually a president that wins, their party tend to pull a lot of their party with them. And we talked about this, how 2020, Biden really did not get those big numbers in the House and clearly not in the Senate. And that's kind of an anomaly as well. And now you're seeing this next anomaly. And we talked about this before, way before the midterms, how I said this could be a year that could be a little bit funkier, even before Roe v. Wade, just because of the way that we've kind of become now, where, you used to have, when the Democrats had the majority in the House for 40 years, there were times where they had hundreds more people in the House. Now we're talking about 5 or 6 more, 10 more. I mean, it's that narrow.
Before election, like before it changes for next year, the Democratic majority, is it like 10? What is it right now?
It's less than that. I think it's like 6. I mean, it's literally in the single digits, and that could be the same for the Republicans.
Yeah, they could have 5 or 6. Digits.
Yeah. I mean, that's crazy. And then think that the Senate, even if it stays in Democratic hands, is going to be 50-50 or 51-49. I mean, you can't get a lot done when you don't have a big majority on either side. So it's crazy to see how, like, it's basically 50-50 coin flip kind of elections. And has the wave election gone away? Will we not see these big waves anymore that we've seen even as recently as 2018? Is it going to be more of a very tiny difference? I think it's also changed too, like we talked about, in 2012, when Barack Obama was running for re-election, unemployment was like over 7%. And there was the common thought that an incumbent won't win re-election when the unemployment rate is so high. And yet he won re-election. And then you look at this year and it was like, inflation is so high, Democrats are going to be killed. And you didn't see that. So even those old variables that we always used to base on the economy seem to no longer be justified. And again, I think we saw a lot of abortion, like a lot of folks went out and voted, and it wasn't being picked up in the polls. And I also think a lot of Republicans, moderate Republican women, also voted and said this is a control issue. And as we've said all along, if Republicans always talk about Democrats trying to control everybody, but it's kind of hypocritical when they're trying to control a woman's right to her own autonomy of her body. And I think there were a lot of moderate Republican women that were like, no, I don't think so. And we're also voting, like you saw in Kentucky. And I think in Montana also it's going to be the same. And you see that in very red states where a lot of people are like, I don't think so. And so it's almost a Republican, a libertarian, moderate Republican issue too, to say, no, I don't want you to control what I can or can't do. So I think for Republicans, they really have to look at some of those results and say, and they won't, but maybe we should back off on the abortion issue, because they've lost every single time now that it's been put to voters, including in very red states like Kansas and Kentucky, which, by the way, Kansas and Kentucky, it looks like the Kansas governor, who's a Democrat, won re-election as well. So you have 2 states that are very red that currently have Democratic governors. So that was another little interesting tidbit. But yeah, I think for Republicans, they've really got to figure out in 2024, what are they going to be messaging in the presidential election? Because that's going to be starting soon.
Right. Well, Tamra, that's actually what I wanted to bring up as we finish up. Do you think that Republicans and obviously, the talking heads, the analysts, the pollsters and such, do you think that they didn't take into consideration how an issue like abortion is a lot more bipartisan, but very personal, and maybe people aren't going to talk about it to the, other voters? They're not going to talk to poll takers. They might not even talk to their own family about it. But is it a much stronger issue than, on a national level, but then also down to the local level than a lot of people thought, Tamra?
Oh, certainly more than a lot of Republicans thought. You're saying, is it like how when we used to say before the 2020 election, how there are people who maybe secretly conservatives who are voting for Biden, probably not letting their family and friends know that, but that's what they're doing. And, same thing goes for this, especially for something like abortion, where, like you said, it's a very personal issue. And absolutely people might, not let their church members know that they are not comfortable with pro-life policy. So yeah, certainly. I think that this might be hopefully having the Republican Party start to reassess their messaging, and it's just really interesting how from state to state, like if Kansas and Kentucky, um, as conservative as they are want to remain pro-choice, but yet other states like Florida, yeah, it's just so interesting how you really can't gauge. I mean, the pollsters, I think they were, correct me if I'm wrong, Scott, but like the polls were off this time, but during the 2020 election, wasn't the polling incorrect at that point too? So
Yep, it's kind of interesting. You can see they had more of a Democratic bias in 2020, and they seem to have more of a Republican bias in 22. So you've kind of seen that a little bit back and forth the last couple of elections. Absolutely.
Yeah, so
and
who knows what that means for the general election, or for the for our 2024 election. Yeah. What will the polls be saying, and what will really happen?
Well, Tamra, sort of during this election cycle, there seemed to be a talking point of people don't care about abortion. They care about the economy. They care about jobs. They care about gas prices. But I think people can certainly care about all of those things. And I think that might have been the takeaway, and I don't know. I'm generalizing in my head, but I don't think I heard a lot of women say that. But I think that, look, the economy is very important. It is something for it's a lot of people are having issues with just cost of living. It's not just gas prices, it's everything, but that doesn't mean at the same time it's like, yeah, I'm only looking for this strong on economy candidate who believes in QAnon and talking trees and fake elections. I'm not going to really vote for them. Scott, I'll let you go in a moment, but this is what I was talking about earlier. The New York Post has a full cover today about Future for DeSantis, and then look right down there in the bottom. By the way, P.S. Hochul wins here in New York. They had a great cover, I think, on maybe it was even yesterday. Was if the New York Jets can win, why can't Zeldin? And I don't think anybody thinks the Jets are going to win much either. But it's just like, right. Oh man, they're just throwing anything against the wall. So Go City 386 with a great point. For me, Brian Kemp and Ron DeSantis won using the Southern strategy. I think that those are very strong local candidates. Those are candidates that people remember how they handled COVID reopenings. I think that in those two states, that's very strong. What do you, let's have and I know Scott needs to go, so I want to let you sort of tidy up your thoughts either on that, but also a big picture, a plus from yesterday, and there has to be some kind of negative, though, something that's nagging at you.
I would say, just real quick, just to point, Ron DeSantis in Florida has a very unique political setup too, where you have more older Latino voters that have now shifted conservative. And you saw, again, what happened in 2020, Miami-Dade County, which was a liberal bastion, it went Republican and really up the Republican side in the presidential election in 2020, because you see a lot of people that came from Venezuela and Cuba and other places. So Florida's very unique in general with this politics. My type will be, is this the end of the wave elections, or is this just an anomaly? Just seeing the kind of coin flip thing we saw, and even in 2020, we really didn't see the pull for Democrats to carry over across the finish line with President Biden in that election. So my thoughts for the wave election over. I think regardless of what happens, even if they both go to the Republicans in the House and the Senate, Democrats have to be very, very happy by their results than not expecting. I think the downside, kind of to Tamara's point earlier, is, again, how close these votes still are. When you think Oz barely lost in Pennsylvania, when you see Herschel Walker so close to Raphael Warnock in Georgia, when you see Carrie Lake still potentially could win the governor's race in Arizona against Katie Hobbs, when you see just how close these elections are with some really terrible candidates, that's definitely negative too, because that's kind of frightening that you can have these type of people still be able to come in and even possibly still win, but even if they lose, barely lose. So to me, that's definitely the negative. But overall, I feel a lot of bright spots for this country to see, the abortion rights issues and how well Democrats did in such a challenging year for politics in general, with everything going on in the world and inflation. It's fascinating to see how different I thought this was going to go compared to where it's at right now.
Well, Scott, thank you for your time as always. We will definitely make sure that we're all back. Maybe when we figure out the House and or the Senate, it could be a while, but we'll make sure we're back at least once or twice more before the new year. And Scott, of course, as it says on the screen, you can be found at SMan80, and Scott can be found momentarily at his dentist appointment. But thank you for your time, and it's always great to have you on and talk to us. Tamra, for you, is the big disappointment just locally Los Angeles the fact that this guy Rick Caruso could very well be mayor? Are there bigger disappointments? And we'll end on the up note. Don't worry, I'm starting with the negative. But is that the most disappointing thing as we sit here Wednesday morning?
Yeah, definitely. The bright side of Caruso winning the mayoral race is that if he does, is that the mayor really doesn't have a lot of power to address homelessness. They campaign on homelessness because that is what the number one priority of people in the city of Los Angeles is, because we're in such a crisis. But fortunately, he does not have a lot of power to affect homelessness. He does have a lot of power to affect housing because he is in real estate development. So that means that he is going to, fund initiatives that are going to help his luxury developer friends, and that is going to contribute to the housing crisis. So he will be hurting, putting more people on the street in that capacity, and that he's not helping build more affordable housing. So yes, it's going to be bad, but the good news is that the city council is most likely swinging a lot more progressive, and we've got a lot of there's judges that are being elected that are public defenders. There are a lot of offices that are turning from a moderate candidate to a progressive candidate. So that is really great, and even if the mayor race is a disappointment.
Right. And it's I guess they're still counting. What I saw was that it was close, but it's not settled yet. I do think that I can see homelessness as being sort of a major concern for Angelino's voting, but at the same time not coming up with a solution. So but in any case, what there, I hear the phone ringing. I was going to ask you what your big takeaway is. Is it as simple as what we talked about for the last hour, that it wasn't as bad as it could have been, or is there something else that jumps out at you?
Shoot, I'm not picking that up, but it's on the other side of the room, so it's
so we'll just let it ring.
Okay,
that's okay.
So sorry, what was the question?
So I want to know, is your positive what we spent most of the hour talking about, which is not as bad as it could have been, or is there something else you see that's like, oh, this is actually, to me, one of the big positives of last night?
Yeah, not as bad as it could have been. I think that is a major positive, because I think that is going to give us more hope for the 2024 presidential election. I mean, we still don't know. I think most Democrats are not feeling like it's a good idea for Biden or Harris to try to run as president. We still don't have a viable candidate. This race has energized DeSantis. I think he's feeling that he's definitely going to pull out a Republican nomination for the 2024 race. But at least it's very slightly maybe turning back to business as usual, as the Trumpian candidates are not are losing their steam.
And I'll put you on the spot. This answer can change over the next 2 years. Do you think Joe Biden should run for re-election?
No.
I don't either. Okay. I do legitimately, when we're not joking around, I don't expect Hillary Clinton to run again, but I do think that she might be more up to the task than Uncle Joe. I don't have a good answer for who would be a good candidate.
Don't either.
And I'm not smart enough to know, I guess LBJ was the last guy who could have run for re-election that didn't, so it's not quite in our lifetime, but it's not unheard of. But I mean, if you remember during the primaries, he even said that he was gonna only do one term, but then he backed away from that. So that'll be something to focus on. Let's see how the House actually shakes out. But in the interim, we just follow me on Twitter and Instagram at ChristianDMZ. I'll do my best to let you know when we'll be back with another show. And Tamara, if people want to keep in touch with you, how
follow
do they
me
do
on
that?
Follow me on Instagram and TikTok at Hey Tamra.
Oh, and now that Sarah Huckabee Sanders is a governor, do you think you're going to dust off the impression because she's back out there?
Unfortunately, yeah.
Yeah, that was my thought on that. I'm like, oh, that's good for Tamara. She has the SHS impression. In any case, thanks to everyone in the chat, and thanks to all of you. We will be in touch soon. We'll let you know when you can find us. We'll talk to everybody soon. But have a great Wednesday, everyone.